Alright, let's continue. My battery went. My phone's battery was low, and my memory was erased. So let's continue. So sensation in the external world, because the external world is the main purpose of why these functions were were there in the first place in evolutionary sense. So in the external world, we can we have two modes of perception. The first one is sensation. Sensation is about directly experiencing the external world via our sense organs. While and here's how you need to understand what intuition is. So we all have, when we perceive reality through our sensory organs, we only perceive what is immediately present in our current environment, and that is sensation. But we don't only perceive holistically, we don't only perceive what we think, what we see directly in our external environment. We also have this sense of expectancy of what should exist in the field of reality that we're not currently able to perceive. And the example of this is what's behind your back. You kind of have this sense of expectation that of what should exist behind your back. You can you have this kind of intuitive understanding of what will happen after this moment. So extroverted intuition is all of the things that are not necessarily present in your field of sensory uh, of your sensory perception, but it includes it brings up all the context in which all relevant information might be related to the present moment. So so now you understand what intuition what intuition does. It's not necessarily about the unconscious. It is prime when it's extroverted, it's primarily about the external world. It's primarily about our interaction with the external world. It's predicting what should exist, what things that we don't see should exist. So when we say memory, when we say introverted introverted sensation in modern interpretations, we often we often thought of it as being related to memory, but that's kind of wrong, because in a way extroverted sensation is more is more is is more attuned to the detail of our sensory environment, so it has the most accurate memory of of our visual representations. But an extroverted intuition is more attuned to the information, to the background information that is present in behind our sensory behind our sensory uh, behind our sensory understanding, behind our sensory perception. So yeah, and for now, let's keep the all the judgment or rational functions. Let's talk more about the perceptive functions. And now we're we're moving to the introverted ones. So you already know the principle that is in play with the extroverted functions. And now you can apply that also to our internal reality, which is the archetypes and our instincts. But I suspect our perception is more related to the archetypes rather than instincts. But that's arguable. All of this is arguable. But anyway, this makes more sense in my opinion. So introverted intuition is employing the function of intuition to directly experience our internal reality. So it detects every archetypal images that are uh, that are emerging into our consciousness. And yeah, it works exactly like how extroverted sensation perceives the external reality through the sensory organs. But but introverted intuition, instead it perceives our internal reality of archetypes, of our generational complexes, of our this genetic component of our perceptions. So it perceives all of that, and then with this you have introverted sensation. And much like the extroverted intuition experiences the outer world, albeit via the intuitive function, so the extroverted intuition doesn't directly experience the outer world, but merely infers it. And now you have the introverted sensation that 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 is trying to that is perceiving the our internal reality of archetypes, not memories. It tries to perceives all of that, all of our archetypes, but by using the sensory functions. So it will represent all of those archetypes into an image, in or into a visual, audio, or any other sensory representations, right? Excuse me for a moment. I just need to smoke. So that's how the dynamics works with introverted perception. And when you look at how Jung describes these these processes, he always he always group all the external perception. He always groups an introverted perception with another introverted perception, and he also groups the extroverted perception with another extroverted perception, and likewise with other categories like introverted judgment and extroverted judgment. He always groups each of them with its irrespective similar neighbor functions, and this is not without a reason. There is a reason behind this. So when we employ our extroverted sensation, we're focusing solely on the object itself, right? But what we don't realize is we also unconsciously perceives the implication of that. But all of those contexts which are in the domain of extroverted intuition, we're not conscious of them. So you have the consciousness and you have the unconscious, or I'd rather say that it is the subconscious. And consciousness is something that we deploy we employ our attention to, but our subconscious is something that we're holding back for a moment, but we're still needing it uh, into the background of our attention. So that is how the relation works between extroverted intuition and extroverted sensation. What you're attending to, you're suppressing the other one to the background, but not necessarily to the unconscious. I think it's more accurately described as the subconscious. It is half conscious, half unconscious. The way you can think of this in is like your monitor. It's like your within a computer. The way you can see this is your computer has a monitor and it has a RAM, a random access memory, and it works like a short-term memory. Yeah, it is exactly like this. So you have the interface. The interface is your consciousness. Your random access memory is the unconscious, the subconscious, and your internal memory, or long-term memory, is your internal unconsciousness. So yeah, you need to really understand the relationship between these two neighboring functions. They are about the relation between the consciousness and the subconscious. It is the relation between your attention and your short-term memory. So so yeah. Where am I? I'm sorry. Right. And back to our introverted perception. which is introverted sensation and introverted intuition. If you read Jung's descriptions of them, you will notice that they are very similar. They're really, really similar. And this applies to all other functions that are neighboring, like extroverted sensation and extroverted intuition, extroverted thinking and extroverted feeling, and also introverted thinking and introverted feeling. So each of them, so both functions in each of those categories is similar to each other. And that's not without, and Jung didn't categorize them this way unintentionally. It is intentional because it is exactly how the mind works. So with introverted intuitive, their consciousness is tied to the archetypes directly. But then and what are these archetypes exactly? Uh, we can only speculate what that means. It could mean that it is this set of rules, this set of complexes that are used by our consciousness to understand the outer reality. So the introverted intuitive type is conscious of this set of rules, this set of complexes that are passed down from generation to generation, and they're perceiving this directly from the data that they're born with these internal genetic dispositions. All of those internal archetypal informations, they perceive all of this set of rules. This set of rules is about how all of these external informations are being related to each other. So what they perceive is the archetypes, and what archetypes mean is the relation between all of our external informations. So with that, we so an introverted intuitive type must necessarily also have all of these sensory memories of things, the visual representations of all of those archetypes, but those visual representations become the background of these archetypal relations that they're bringing up to their consciousness. And so I'm not exactly clear how that is, but I know with extroverted intuition, I can perceive uh, things that are, for example, I have the visual representation in front of me that is extroverted sensation, but but often this realm of extroverted sensation is not what I register in my consciousness, because my attention is brought to all the context of this uh, non immediate reality that is behind me or elsewhere. But still, the external sensation is something that is half conscious. It is subconscious. It is not entirely unconscious. So I can still see what's happening right in front of me, but it is subconscious, right? And this is how how our internal perception also happens. But instead of but but as much as how our ex, ex, external perceptive function is primarily uh, the function that has the agenda of trying to perceive the external world, so in so that intuitive functions becomes somewhat become somewhat secondary in nature, but individual differences make this intuitive function more primary for extroverted intuitive type. This is also how our internal perception function works. It is primarily dedicated to into the experience of our internal reality of our archetypes. But introverted sensation is required in order to understand, in order to not understand, but I don't know, maybe it doesn't have a purpose in in its own, but it's something that is more related to the outer world. It is like a bridge that we can make with the outer world. So with introverted intuition, you have all of these uh, background archetypal associations that are being made, and with introverted sensation, you transform, you make sense of these relations by attaching images to them, by attaching the visual representations from your visual memory to them, not just visual necessarily, also all of your sensory memory. But that's the idea. It is like a bridge that that create way for our for our for all of the archetypal contents to be to be communicated to the outer world. And I'm not saying that's the intrinsic purpose, but in evolution I'm sorry, but in evolutionary sense, I mean, that seems to be the purpose. But of course, the introverted intuitive type doesn't have to necessarily make it its purpose to communicate what it perceives to the outer world. So it becomes somewhat a decision to make for them. So I'm not saying that the purpose is to communicate it to the outer world if if relating to each individual. It's up to them. But in the bigger sense, in evolutionary sense, I think that's the main purpose of the of the bridging between the unconscious, between the internal unconscious, which is the archetypes, to the outer world. That is the purpose, to communicate them. And so this is also how the relation works with the judgment functions. So if sensation is more related to the outer world, and introvert no and intuition is more related to the internal world, then with judgment function, we have the thinking function being more related to the external world, and feeling function more related to the internal world. The extroverted function, the extroverted so first let's try to understand what it means to process with the thinking function. So there is this interpretation that the thinking function is related to our capacity for language, specifically our verbal language. But I disagree with this. I think it is more related to this associative capacity that is linking between two data, and make them belong to one category. So for example, there is something that you perceive in front of you, and you don't have names for that, but in order to communicate this, of course I have to verbally say it to you. So you see that there are two legs, and it has uh, this I don't know what you call this plastic red horns, and it has wings, and it is small, and you immediately register them as the as chicken. So what is chicken? There is two aspects of chicken. There is the visual representation of chicken, and also the the auditory representation of chicken. So the sound of chicken, this is being associated with the image of the chicken, and that is the thinking function, right? So s- so yeah, it somehow is related to our capacity for language, for verbal language, but it's not necessarily related to only to to verbal. It's not exclusively so. It is also perhaps in other animals there are other ways to make these associations. Perhaps they're linking uh, they're linking the visual representation with with more their with more of their olfactory sensation, with their olfactory representation. So they're not necessarily using language by linking an image to an auditory uh, representation. They probably link. It could be the case that they are linking an image to to other visual, to other representation. So yeah, I think this thinking function, all of these four functions, I think it is something that is universal in all living living organisms. They're not necessarily only the capacity for humans, and that is where many of modern typologists uh, are mistaken. In order to understand these functions, you really need to go to the basic. You need to understand the inner workings of our mind, instead of trying to understand how it relates only to the capacities that are more human. And so we now know that the thinking function is is the function that tries to associate between two data points. And let's move to the feeling function. I think this one is more tricky. So if we analogize it to the thinking function, and I still don't understand the feeling function, by the way, but let's try to to make to make it analog to how the thinking function works. And the way we do that, because thinking function is linking between two sensory categories, so it must be the case that feeling is linking between two of internal intuitive organs. But that sounds strange. But if we're to make the one-by-one correlation with the thinking function, where the thinking function is linking between two sensory informations, then we must say that the feeling function is linking between two types of intuitive informations. So the only way I can make sense of that is perhaps the archetypes are being linked to our instincts. Instincts being more related to action, while the archetype is more related to our perception of these rules of associations. So everything gets convoluted quickly here. So it's kind of understandable that we got confused. But I think if we're to try to understand the true working of our brain, then we need to understand that perhaps that it's most likely to be quite convoluted rather than simple. The fundamentals itself are kind of simple, but the connections between them are complicated to understand. But yeah, it makes sense that to say that the feeling function is trying to associate between the archetypes and our action and our impulses. But this is by no means complete. I still need to think about how this feeling function actually works. And I think we haven't tried to understand how we manage to create to produce to produce our actions. We haven't tried to incorporate action into this understanding. So I will have to take some time and try to understand how it plays a role in the working of our cognitions. Perhaps it is related to the feeling function, but it's also possible that it's related to also the intuitive function. It could be that the intuitive function have these instinctive impulses that are not that are not managed, so it's kind of irrational, but the feeling function is more inhibiting, so it's more controlling of our action. That could be one of the explanations, but I'm still not sure about it. So I think we should end this here. You have the general understanding of how all of these functions work, and I'm gonna try to explore how the feeling function works. And so we've arrived at the part that I I get most awkward about. We'll end this right now, and I'll see you next time.